Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Slack CEO and co-founder, Stewart Butterfield.
Whoa, thank you. Thank you so much. Let me start by saying welcome. We really appreciate all of you taking the time to be here today on a very important Apple announcement day. We're very excited about the lineup. We have some incredible speakers, many of whom have traveled a great distance to be here today, so thank you to all the speakers. Good enough, yeah. I was told there's going to be one of those applause signs behind me, and we didn't have time to get it set up. So we look forward to some really profound and revealing conversations. Hopefully this won't be a normal enterprise software user conference. We're here to learn, and we want to learn with all of you. So behind me is one of the ideas that gave the inspiration for the conference, the idea of a frontier. And in this quote, Sagan was talking about physical frontiers, and specifically space. But when you think about it, our species is always on more than one frontier. There are so many perspectives from which you can look at the world, develop a better understanding of who we are and where we're going. And I've been reading this book, and you know how it happens when you're reading a book and you start to see everything through the lens of that book? That's happening for me. It's a great book, Energy and Civilization by Václav Smil. And it's about our species' increasing ability to harness, redirect, and take advantage of energy flows and stores of energy, and how that has both enabled and shaped civilization. It's full of fascinating observations and calculations, a lot of history, and even more science. It tells a story of how we went from animals who needed about 2,000 kilocalories each day to survive, and that's about 90 watts of continuous output, so about 1 light bulb's worth of energy. And we went from animals who would just forage a light bulb's worth of energy, and then presumably faffed about and enjoyed the mountains and nature and things like that. How we went from that state to a species that gradually wrapped up both their investment in and the production of energy and completely changed themselves in the process. We invested those light bulbs worth of energy into draining swamps and digging wells and building terrace fields and irrigation canals, working metal to build tools and harnessing draft animals to do the plowing, and those animals, of course, needed to be fed as well. We put energy into building roads and food storage structures, devising ways to capture some of the energy in wind and in water. And all the while, this intensification of agricultural prowess enabled higher population densities and the division of labor and increased specialization. Cultures developed and diversified. Groups of people began to look up and wonder who else was out there. Maps were drawn and stories were told about foreign lands. But before you know it, we have steam engines pumping water from coal mines so that we can collect more coal to burn in order to smelt the huge quantities of iron needed to lay down railroads between new urban centers where ships would put in with their stores filled with goods that had traveled from the other side of the world. I promise this is all going to come back to Slack in the end. Indulge me for a few minutes. Just a moment later in the grand sweep of history, we consume tens of billions of barrels of oil a year and sling massive container ships full of manufactured goods over the surface of the planet, produce billions of tons of metric steel and tens of billions of metric tons of concrete. We build these giant towers with electric lights and air conditioning and power enough for computers and copiers and coffee machines and vacuum cleaners and toilets fitted with sensors to automatically flush down the water that was just pumped up to the 61st floor. We have electric cars and diesel trucks and passenger jets and subways and tunnel boring machines. We also have billions of batteries driving impossibly miniature machines, which can direct the tiniest amounts of energy into just the right capacitor to change a 0 to a 1 on a chip with billions of such bits and billions of such capacitors, continually refreshing itself thousands of times a second in order to preserve its state. We have this incredible precision control over the flow of individual electrons. Each of us still only need 1 light bulb worth of energy to stay alive, but here in the United States, we produce and utilize about 11,000 watts each. So that's more than 100 times the requirements of our biological metabolism. All that extra energy removes old constraints which govern what kinds of lives were possible. So we get a world that has Instagram stars and home healthcare workers and mega churches and accountants who work for the teachers union and people who make balloon animals and UPS drivers and content marketers, shout out to the content marketers, and the whole bewildering variety of life. And one of the reasons I found that book so fascinating is how closely it parallels a similar topic, and one that has been fascinating to me for a very long time. And that's the way that our means of storing, sharing, and making use of information has determined the kinds of organizations that were possible. The formation of those early agrarian societies enabled the division of labor, but both the development of agriculture in the first place and the division of labor had as prerequisites an ability to communicate and the development of spoken language. As people experimented and explored and discovered and learned, we stored that knowledge in ritual and in song. And as the complexity of early societies increased, production and trade required ways of recording information with more precision. Early writing systems were mostly used for bookkeeping and allowed for simple economies to develop. They eventually supported bureaucracies and taxation and churches and armies and empires. But as written language became more powerful and expressive, people began writing histories and treatises on geometry and astronomy and philosophy and collecting knowledge together so that scholars could build off one another's work. The technologies became more sophisticated and refined, and the empires grew larger. But you still had to go to where the books were, and copies were precious. Here's the Library of Alexandria, which contained maybe tens of thousands or potentially hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Knowledge was concentrated. There were very few scholars. Literacy rates, where they were not 0%, as they were in most of the world, were 5% or maybe 10% in the most advanced communities. A couple of thousand years later, when we got the printing press, the most advanced cities had 30% literacy rates, and those quickly started going up. Suddenly, copies were cheap. Information can travel. And the impact of this first giant step in information technology showed up quickly in religious and political revolutions all over the world. Later, newspapers and widespread literacy laid a foundation for modern democracies. Double-entry accounting, contracts, a reliable postal service, and well-documented laws, among other things, enabled the modern corporation. In the 19th century, electricity gave us near instantaneous point-to-point communication, first in the form of the telegraph, and then later the telephone. Radio and television broadcasting transformed cultures. And the computer age, the information age, the internet age, whatever you want to call it, is changing everything. I have no idea where it is all going, but I know that we have stepped across a threshold and into a new era. I'm part of the last generation of this species that will ever know life both before and after the internet. Okay, I really do promise this isn't all going to come back to Slack. I actually have in my speaker notes here. So what does this all have to do with Slack? Great question. Parentheses, applause. Wow. Or laughter. There we are. So here's what it has to do with Slack. It's a picture of a Roman army encampment. It's all about to tie up. I have a little quote from the book Team of Teams, which is a description of what was going on in this encampment. And I think this is really relevant to how we design and develop organizations today. So, strict rules governed everything the Roman soldiers did, even the building of their homes. Whether the project was a temporary camp or a permanent fortification in the distant reaches of the empire, the layouts followed the same plan. Every man had a specific construction task, and every tent had its place. The standardization enabled the Romans to construct camp defenses quickly and efficiently. Soldiers could move between units and still participate in construction without breaking the orderly flow of work. Messengers could arrive at camps and forts and immediately know where to find the commander. Most importantly, in the chaos and confusion of an enemy attack, defenders could organize themselves speedily and efficiently. It's another good book, Team of Teams. So at this time, even with a perfect relay of the fastest horses, it took a couple of weeks for news and information to reach one end of the empire to the other. And this strict hierarchy in the army, the strict definition of roles, and all the standardization were required to get anything done and not to fall into chaos. The modern corporation inherited this hierarchy and many other structures and practices from the ancient world. By the end of the 19th century and into the early parts of the 20th century, a wave of scientific management swept across the industrial world. And over the 20th century, there were waves of standardization, process streamlining from the assembly line to what became known as bureaucratic theory. And all of this was required in order to support ever-increasing scale and complexity in large organizations and an increasingly dynamic web of supply chains. But something started happening in the late 70s and in the 80s. And by the dawn of the 21st century, it was very widespread. We didn't need the printing press anymore. We had Xerox machines. And we didn't need to set lead type because we had word processors. At once, electronic communication became mainstream. It became even easier for information to move laterally across organizations. Peer-to-peer communication and coordination of activities was finally possible. Managers looked to find ways to increase autonomy and bottoms-up decision-making. Here at Slack, the company, this phrase, pushing decision-making to the edges of the organization, is one that we repeat over and over again in executive offsites and management training sessions. It's a constant topic for us. But why now? Why are people experimenting with holacracy and flat organizations and new methodologies? Well, the constraints were removed. Communication and the availability of information were and always will be the limiting factors on organizational performance. So this is the University Library in Cambridge, England. And 20 years ago this month, as a grad student, I moved into an apartment across the street and was a daily visitor. It's an amazing place. It's got 8 million volumes. It's one of the 6 copyright libraries in the UK. But wow, finding things was a lot of work and a lot of walking around this building. In contrast, here's a screenshot of my phone from a couple days ago where I incredibly clumsily tried to ask what's the tallest mountain in Kansas, and not only could it figure out what I was trying to ask, but I could ask a question of all the books and databases and news archives and magazine articles and all the personal writing in the world and get back an instantaneous answer. That's coming to the workplace. Over the next 2 days, you're going to hear a lot about the impact of all of this innovation. And you're going to get a glimpse of the enormous creativity which organizations around the world are bringing to organizational design and development and the performance of teams now that all those constraints are falling away. If you leave with nothing else, leave knowing that we, collectively, all of us here in the room, have enormous opportunities ahead of us to explore these frontiers together. This is just the beginning. It's also the beginning of the conference. So let's get things kicked off. Welcome once again to all of you. And please welcome April Underwood, our VP of Product, to the stage. She's got a lot of exciting news to share.
Good morning. It is so great to see you all here today. It is such an honor for me to get to host our first day of the first ever Slack conference. So as Stewart just shared, we have a firm belief that the constraints around organizational design and around how work gets done are going to radically diminish over the coming decades. But to grasp where we're going, we want to start by really rooting you in where we are today. Because despite many of you who are already Slack fans, and we're so grateful you've joined us, the truth is that for most teams, teamwork hasn't really changed in decades. So I want to break down a few trends that we see happening that we think are really instrumental as to why this is the moment for a product like Slack, and to tee you up for some of the things that I get to share with you that we have to share today. So first of all, there's no surprise that messaging is everywhere. And probably many of you are texting or messaging right now as you're enjoying this content. So I don't blame you. Obviously, messaging has really become the way that we all communicate. And especially in our personal lives, it's just the de facto way to communicate with other people. So it just makes sense that, of course, messaging would also make the leap to the communication that we do in the workplace. It's inevitable. It's what employees expect. But at the same time that we're driving towards the simplicity of messaging, the real-time nature of it, there's another axis which is ever expanding, which is that probably many of you are here today because you also build software for teams at work. So on average, what we hear is enterprises, larger companies, have thousands of cloud services that they use. It's really pretty mind-blowing. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for this. It's never been easier than it is today to build and launch software because of cloud computing. But also, there's such a demand for work tools that actually mimic the quality and the ease of use that we have in our personal lives. So we think this is a really great trend, and we feel like we're part of an ecosystem of developers that want to build great applications for every purpose in the workplace. Engineering tools, design tools, HR tools, expense reporting, really the list goes on and on. But the sheer volume of these tools makes it difficult to access, organize, and synthesize information. And so it creates challenges, not just for CIOs, but for all of us. We're bouncing between browser tabs. We have to download a lot of mobile apps just to be able to get work done on the go. So there's a real need for something like Slack that allows all of these tools to work together, along with your communication amongst your team members in harmony. But one of the areas that we're really fascinated by, as you can probably tell from Stewart's talk, is some of the human aspects of communication and of teamwork, which is that as we talk to customers, there's such a demand for a culture that is going to help you attract and retain talent, that's going to bring out the people's best work. And the hallmarks of that are typically around transparency and breaking down silos. And very specifically, communication doesn't flow through org chart lines anymore. And instead is more like a network within your own company where shared purpose, a desire for shared context drives communication that's really quite complex and winding within your organization. So the truth is that the tools we had in the past make this nearly impossible. And if you've worked at a company that's tried to be very transparent but has been doing it over email, you find yourself having to triage hours of transparency in the form of basically being subscribed to any email you might ever need to read anything about. So the truth is that there is a real need for new tools and also a new platform to support this new way of work. So this cultural transformation is probably even the most important driver here, which is that there's a hunger for a new way of working. And it probably won't surprise you to know that we think Slack is part of the answer to that. So why is Slack the answer for this, really the answer to these trends and the answer to this new way of working? We believe it's for a few reasons. I mean, some of it just starts with who we are. So Slack is purpose-built to reflect the way you already work. We want to meet you where you are, so we don't try to enforce upon you a way of working. We instead give you tools that mean that it's not so much that constraints go away, but instead they're developed democratically across your organization. You can use notifications and workflows and apps and best practices and emoji and all the ways that really embody your company's culture and how you get work done and tailor fit how you use Slack to your company's specific needs. So Slack is highly adaptable. It's very, very flexible and configurable. And so it actually creates this foundation for you to be able to use Slack in a way that is completely different from any other company. And that's by design. So as you probably all know, and I'm a bit preaching to the choir, I'll admit, but channels are really at the foundation of Slack. So channels are a significantly more intuitive and organized way to work than email. Hopefully you all agree. So people want to know where to go for the latest information. When I open Slack every morning, I don't have to spend the first 20 minutes trying to find if anything important is sitting in an inbox. I can discern based on the channels which have new messages what needs my attention. I can pay attention to the discussions in exec staff, or a DM for Stewart, or something from my team that I happen to know is launching today. I can put those things ahead of the other unread items in my inbox, and it reduces the anxiety and allows me to focus on what's important. So that's fundamentally different than the other communication tools we've had in the past. Of course, channels can be organized across organizational structures and time zones. So like I said, they're highly flexible, and they can work with your company's needs. But the main thing that we all want to avoid is FOMO, so fear of missing out. So with Slack, you know that you can be pulled into channels via a mention or an invite. If something important happens, our machine learning-driven features like highlights can bring your attention to it. And you don't need to oversubscribe. You can join just the channels that you need for the work at hand. When you do join a channel, you get historical context. You don't just drop into a channel and immediately have to have somebody explain to you why you've been brought there. You can discern it yourself. You can communicate and collaborate right there with the rest of your team. And once you're done with your workflow, you could use things like emoji reactions, you can use our apps, and once you're done, you can happily focus and move on to the next most important thing and say sayonara. The reason you can do that, of course, is because every conversation, every workflow that happens in Slack is contributing to an archive for your company to share. So say you leave that channel, you can always find it later. And of course, our search functionality works not just across messages, but across apps as well, including files that get shared from third-party services. So again, you know it's there for you. You're not going to miss out on anything. You can always come back to it later. So we want to break this down, even though many of you already, hopefully, are the converted when it comes to channels and to Slack, because it really speaks to how fundamentally different Slack is from the old way of working, and a little bit as to why. We think this is really important because we believe that by 2025, channels will replace email as the primary way that people communicate and collaborate at work. I mean, it just seems that way, right? Am I right? Seems like we're heading in that direction. So let me give you a quick update on the business, because we're a few years into this, about 3.5 years into this, and we've had some incredible progress, and we ultimately think our momentum is pretty hard to match. We've done that because we've been very, very focused on our mission, but just this summer, we actually crossed $200 million in annual recurring revenue, a prediction we made at the beginning of this year. So we're very excited about that. And I should say thank you to all of our customers. So we actually now have more than 2 million paid users. And that includes 43 of the Fortune 100 have joined us as paying customers, with, of course, many more of those Fortune 100 testing out the free version of Slack. In terms of usage, of course, because we really are driven by our mission, which is to make people's working lives simpler, more pleasant, and more productive, we also care about how many people are actually actively using the product. That's a big focus for us. So we have more than 9 million weekly active users around the world, and 6 million every day. And of course, when we talk about adoption, we're not just talking about messaging. We also care deeply about ensuring that our customers are able to get all of the benefits of our platform. And so they're taking advantage of all of the apps that many of you are building. They're discovering them in our app directory. and then actually using them. And what we've seen is that we've seen over 9 million, nearly 9 million app installs from our app directory, and we have crossed 1,000 apps in the app directory. So I want to say thank you to all of the developers in our ecosystem. So I get to share some announcements with you now. Now that you hopefully see that the opportunity is right for Slack to be used in more ways, and that it is truly inevitable that this will be the new way of working, and that we are already on this new frontier. I want to tell you about 2 new ways that we are making Slack useful for new audiences, new types of people, as well as new types of work. So let's start with some new people. Over the past few years, we've been pretty busy here building out the Slack that you know. And I'll be honest, we've been pretty focused on North America. And we, first of all, want to say thanks to our global users outside of North America who've been patient with us. In fact, over half, 55% of our weekly active users are outside of the US, which completely blows us away because you may not know this, but Slack is only available in English. So just as an example, we have over 330,000 users in Tokyo alone, which is about 3 times the number of people that go through Narita Airport every day. So we have a really big announcement today, something we're very excited about and is really the starting point for us taking Slack global, which is that we have now answered the call, and we have Slack available today in Spanish, German, and French, and in Japanese by the end of the year. So I get to stand up here and share the good news. This has been a huge effort within Slack. It's not just localization of every aspect of the product and the admin experience. It's our sales and support teams being ready and standing by to work with customers in the markets that are served by those languages. It's our international billing support. It's our translated help center. We really want to hold the same bar of craftsmanship that we consider one of our values here at Slack for all of our customers around the world. So this is a really big and exciting moment for us, and we'll actually have some folks out on the road next week getting to spend some time in some of these new markets. So how many minutes until the Apple keynote starts? Better talk fast. We've got one more thing. Got it, yeah. Anyway, it was worth a try. If you've been following us, though, this has been a big year. In January, we launched Enterprise Grid, which is our product for tens or hundreds of thousands of employees. I just announced that we have taken our first steps in French, German, Spanish, and then Japanese by the end of the year. But there's a whole other body of work, which is incredibly important to nearly all of our customers. And that's because no company operates as an island. We all have vendors, our food and beverage vendor, our outside legal counsel, partners like some of the partners you'll hear from us this week. You have customers with whom you work closely. So every company is part of a constellation of companies that work together, really a network. And as it turns out, there's a lot of demand for Slack to be the solution for that work that happens between companies. What's happened in the past is, of course, you may be one of the 2/3 of our paid customers who use guest accounts, where you invite somebody into your team. Or you may be falling back to an old way of working and finding that the minute you need to work outside your organization, you don't get to use Slack in the way that you've developed to work within your organization. You instead have to use email, make a phone call, use older tools that bring back the memories of the way it was before. So we think that Slack can offer a very straightforward solution to this, and I'm very excited to announce it today. So now you can connect two separate organizations in Slack. So you're creating a common space, a channel, where you can communicate in real time. You can use apps, you can share files, you can make phone calls. Each side is able to manage the membership in that channel so that a partnership or a client-vendor relationship is able to bring the right people into the conversation, just like you can within your own team. So we've already been testing this for quite some time, and we've got marketing teams that are working with creative agencies to go from brainstorming ideas to reviewing designs and launching their campaign all within Slack. So we call these shared channels, and they're available for our paid teams today on Standard and Plus. We'll be launching enterprise grid support later this year, and we're just getting started with enabling companies to be able to work together seamlessly the same way they've already adopted within Slack and shared channels. And I should mention, as always, we are thinking about how we can enable our developers on our platform to be able to participate in everything that we do. And so we have a handful of partners that have built robust integrations for shared channels. They're Dropbox Paper, Zoom, and Harvest all have apps today. And what I love about this is that you may discover that within a company with whom you work, perhaps your advertising agency, maybe they're big fans of Dropbox Paper, and they're really using it in some creative ways. This is a way for you to actually discover and get a peek into how other organizations are using applications. And I suspect for our developers, what we will see is that this is not going to drive intercompany network effects for Slack itself, but also for the 1,000 apps in our app directory and growing. So we're really excited about this, and I can't wait to get many of you trying out this feature. We think that it is ultimately the most important thing we've launched since Slack itself. There's really no alternative to this, and it's a very unique way of working that I think will become inevitable very quickly based on what we're hearing from our customers. So, thank you. Stewart told me he was going to get an applause sign. I don't know what happened, so I appreciate that. So we believe that the next frontier of work is happening right now. Never before have you been able to bring the people within your organization, the applications you use, as well as the other organizations with whom you work, all together into one tool, into one way of working. So we believe this change in work is inevitable, and we're excited that you're a part of building it with us. We're so grateful that you're here this week. It's a very special time for us. So with that, I'm going to stop talking about software, because what we really like to focus on, as I mentioned, is how our customers are using it. And so I'm going to invite to the stage Kelly Watkins, our global head of marketing, who's going to have a conversation with a few of our customers that have been trying out shared channels. Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, April. As a marketer, I'm incredibly excited about the possibilities that come together with shared channels. The work of growing a brand globally not only involves an incredible internal team, shout out to Slack Marketing for pulling off this awesome event, but also it involves work with external partners like agencies and contractors like April just mentioned. For the past several months, we've been piloting shared channels with a handful of customers, including Away and Institute, who we're going to hear from next. Away's luggage has been hailed as some of the best in the market, and the best since we've seen in a really long time, breakthrough innovations in how luggage is being done. They've developed a cult following since they launched in 2015, so much so that they've sold more than 100,000 suitcases in just 2 years. Their luggage is incredible if you haven't used it. The built-in charging feature is super handy when you're on the go. Institute is a leading creative studio. They were founded in 2013, and their client list includes artists like Beyoncé and Kanye West, and brands like Nike and Equinox, not to mention some work that they have that'll be debuting at Paris Fashion Week at the end of the month. When you put these two creative powerhouses together, there's no limit to what they can do. And shared channels is the perfect platform to facilitate their work. To share more about their partnership and what they've built using shared channels, please join me in welcoming Jen Rubio, co-founder of Away, and Nate Brown, founder and creative director of Institute, to the stage. and Nate, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
For having us. Wow.
Yeah, it's a full house. It's a good crowd.
Hi, guys.
What's up?
So I'm really excited to dig in a little bit more on some of the work that you've been doing in shared channels. But first, I just wanted to start a little bit more at the beginning with hearing more about each of your businesses and how they got started. So Jen, I'd love to start with you. Tell us more about Away. How did it get going, and how does work happen there?
Yeah, we launched in February of 2016 with just one product, the perfect suitcase for everyone. And since then, actually some updated stats, we've sold over 150,000 suitcases, but that's just the beginning. From the beginning, we've always wanted to build more of a travel lifestyle brand. So we're always thinking about what are travel experiences we can build and improve. And this year, we've done things like launch a travel magazine called Here, a podcast called Airplane Mode, this pop-up hotel, which we're going to talk about today. And all of our work happens on Slack. Our team has grown from 5 to 75 people in the last 12 months. We have people right now our headquarters is in New York, but obviously I'm here right now. We have a team with influencers on a trip in Palm Springs. Just got back from Seoul yesterday. So we have people all over the world doing work, and Slack is kind of where the accountability and transparency happens.
That's awesome. It's just been amazing to see how you guys have taken off in the past couple of years.
Thanks.
Nate, we heard about your client list and some of the amazing work that you've been doing, but I'd love to hear a bit more about the project that you've been working on personally, Condition. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how you've been partnering with Away on this project?
Yeah, totally. So I've been working in fashion since I was 16 and led to the formation of Institute in 2013. And one of the sort of driving factors of my interest in the work that we do is wellness and how that sort of drives and changes and forms your life. And so we are launching a platform in January called Condition, and one of the most sort of connected things with wellness is travel. And so we were before me and Jen met, I'd always been a big fan of her brand and what she was doing with not just luggage but travel in general, and sort of the thoughtfulness and mindfulness that goes into the process of traveling and discovering an adventure. So like we do with most of our clients, I hit Jen up and nagged her and bothered her until she responded to my emails.
I still haven't responded.
The first one, she was like, who is this? What is this weird project you're talking about? So finally we sat down and we met, and we sort of had multiple discussions about how we could work together on something interesting, and she had been sort of formulating this really exciting pop-up project in Paris for Paris Fashion Week. And I was always interested in the challenge of Paris Fashion Week and how that connected to wellness, because you think of the ingredients of Fashion Week and it's parties and croissants, and it's in Paris, so there's cigarettes involved.
Wine.
And a lot of wine, a whole lot of wine. But there's also this obviously, being as connected as we are as a generation, there's this understanding of what it takes to better care for yourself. So we thought it would be a perfect opportunity to partner and sort of use that as our sort of like jumping off point for what our collaboration looks like. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So Jen, tell us more about this hotel pop-up. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, so it actually came just from us, like our Slack banter, if you will.
Which includes a lot of crazy stuff, by the way.
Yeah, we just named his
memes.
dogs, like my unborn children. There's like a lot of weird stuff that happens in our
Good thing
shared
for
channel.
That search in the archive will come in handy later.
Yes.
But we were actually, I think one thing this shared channel has like really done for us is we're both, as you guys can probably tell, or like we're not the most linear thinkers, and we're both always on the road. Like one of us is like in an airport every day. We were just saying backstage how this is the first time we've been in the same place since we met. So I'm always just sending Nate things like, what if we could do this? What if we could do that? And I think before, when you had an agency partner or just someone you're collaborating with, you have to kind of wait for meetings to talk about ideas, to take next steps. And this like level of, I guess like stream of consciousness that we now can have with each other has led to a lot of things like this pop-up hotel. So I was in Paris a few months ago. I was staying at this amazing hotel in the 8th called Amistan. And I was just sending Nate pictures on Slack, because that's how we talk. And he was like, if Away did a hotel, this is exactly what it would look like. And I'm like, yeah, but if Away did a hotel, it would have all of these things. And he was like, well, let's do it. And that was like 6 weeks ago, actually. Yeah. So
wow.
In the last 6 weeks, we've basically just been like rapid fire going back and forth. And so for Paris Fashion Week at the end of this month, we are taking over the Amistan, and it's called Shea Away. Nate and Institute are doing all of the wellness programming. We're bringing in talks and workshops, which you can talk about a little bit, but we're basically creating the perfect hotel experience for Paris Fashion Week.
That's amazing. That's really cool. We'll have to see if we can get out there to see it. So it's so clear to me, Jen, that like this is such a thing for Away that's so on brand. It just seems so connected with the values that you care about as a company and the ideas that you're putting out in the world. But I just know from talking to you that you're growing this company so massively, and this is such a huge project to take on in such a short amount of time. Did that make you nervous at all?
I mean, that's pretty much the way we've built the entire company. Just kind of, I think our competitive advantage is being able to take advantage of opportunities like this as they come, and just trying to figure out what resources we need to make them happen. So in this case, like, was it the wisest idea? Like, did we resource plan to do a pop-up hotel in 6 weeks when people plan for Fashion Week like a year in advance? Mm-hmm. Probably not, but what we were able to do is collaborate with our friends, have this kind of reach out into our community and kind of take advantage of all of our relationships in order to make it happen. That's how we launched the company in such a short amount of time. And I think not saying no to opportunities like this and taking advantage of them as they come is the reason why we've grown so quickly.
That's awesome. So Nate, you've worked with a lot of different clients on projects like this one and other massive endeavors, but I know this is the first time that you've done this type of a collaboration and shared channels. Was there anything about that experience that really stood out for you in terms of it helping you and Jen work together on this idea?
Absolutely, yeah. I think one of the things that's really interesting that you touched on, I'd like to elaborate on a bit more, is the way that we think is very, it's linear, non-linear, right? Mm-hmm. So we have, we try to add as much method to the madness that is the creative process. And, I think Slack is a really interesting tool because it allows us to have that off-the-cuff communication at all times while still adding the guardrails and parameters and organizational components that you would normally get out of scheduled meetings. Mm-hmm. But in a case like this, we don't have time for that all the time. One, we're traveling all over the place at any given time. And so what's really interesting is the lead times for our projects can shrink rapidly because we're constantly communicating in a very effective and organized way. And that, to me, was the most kind of eye-opening exclamation point moment when we were collaborating on this project in particular, because a project of the sort of magnitude of taking over a hotel and programming that hotel for 7 days, it might sound quite small, but the reality is there's so many different intricate sort of details that go into that process, and traditionally without that ability to collaborate so frequently with such organization, we would have had we would be in a really bad place right now. We'd be like, oh, okay, this is in a week, and yeah. So it just kind of adds a lot of organization to our sort of wild thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it helps our teams understand us more because it's not like this directive that's coming that's like, oh, we're doing this in Paris. They were able to see kind of like the formation of the entire idea. And they're able to like comment on things and react to them and realize where we're coming from so that the end product is so much closer to what our actual vision is.
And you can, and as a creative director, you can recall things that you've said as well, which oftentimes, I mean, it goes without saying, and we all understand why the reason why we're here is that gets lost in text, and that gets lost in email, and you'll never find it again. So it's really exciting to be able to have just off-the-cuff conversations and then go back later and find different components of things you were talking about and organize them. And yeah, that was a lifesaver for us.
That's awesome. I know from planning this event for our team, that sense of context and that ability to get everybody aligned around a shared vision was so helpful. I'm glad to hear for you too as well. So for our last round of questions, I wanted to do a bit of a lightning round. I know that you both lightning round. Wow. I know that you both spend a ton of time traveling on the road. So I thought I'd just ask a few questions about what you're up to next. So first question is, next city you're both traveling to?
For me, Morocco, Marrakesh.
So I know I told you I was going home after this, but I decided to go to Morocco also.
That just happened. You made that decision right now. Yeah.
That's
in the green room.
Change of plans from LA.
Change of plans, yeah.
Awesome. So what's your favorite hotel in Marrakesh?
What's the hotel?
El
Fen, yeah.
Awesome.
Jen knows all the hotels. I Slack
He just
Jen.
shows up.
And I say, I'm going here, which hotel should I go to? And she'll give me a list of 5 hotels.
That's awesome. Marriott this week also just launched a really cool integration I was telling you backstage where you can find hotel options through Slack as well.
Hey.
And it's
So
enter a city and see what you're doing. So yeah, that can also help cut down some time. I think this one might be obvious, but who's the person that each of you works with the most on Slack?
Jen.
Yeah.
Currently Jen, yes.
And do you have a favorite emoji that you use with each other?
A puppy.
Well, we make custom, at Institute, we make all our own emojis. So we have emojis for everyone in the studio. The emojis have sub-emojis. Those sub-emojis have sub-emojis. It gets real layered.
A lot of memes going on.
However, I recently discovered, is it the party parrot? Mm-hmm. That changed my life. So there's a website dedicated to the party parrot.
Yep.
I think I spent an entire week trying to find how to use it. There's the Matrix party parrot. I use that one quite a lot.
Yeah.
Just dodging all the questions. But that one, they respond when someone has a lot of questions to ask me, and boom, I just hit the Matrix parrot. Slow down, dude. I'll answer them as they come. So the party parrot is my favorite emoji.
That's awesome. What about you, Jen?
Literally never use that for me. There's a custom emoji called Jen Approved, and it's me with sunglasses on, approving things.
That's awesome.
Nice. I like that.
All right, last question. One place you've never been, but hope that you can go in the next year.
Space.
Ooh. You were inspired by Carl Sagan.
Yes, Carl's one of my favorites. I saw that. It was incredible.
Namibia? I don't
Awesome.
Can't go after that.
Cool. Well, we wish you all the best as your hotel pop-up debuts here at the end of the month. And thank you so much for telling us a bit more about how you use Slack. It was
Thanks
great
for
to
making
hear.
it happen.
Thank you guys.
Awesome.
We leave this way?
One of the most fun things about shared channels during this beta has been for us to get to learn a little bit about how different customers work together. It's almost like the secret life of how companies work together. We, of course, had both Institute in a way as our customers before, but then in bringing them together, we get the opportunity to sort of work with them in their partnership as well, which has been just really, really amazing for the team. So thank you to Jen, Nate, and Kelly. So as you have noted, we've just heard from 2 fairly young companies that have really grown up in Slack. But of course, with our launch of Enterprise Grid this year and just the adoption we're seeing in things like the Fortune 100, we also have some industry heavyweights that are getting many of the same benefits in their own ways. So with us today, we have 20th Century Fox, one of the big 6 major American film studios with content distributed across 194 countries. And they're here today along with a global tech leader that you all know, with about $40 billion in revenues, and our neighbor right here in the Bay Area, Oracle Corporation. So hosting this discussion, we're delighted to have Carrie Bishop, who is the Chief Digital Services Officer of the City of San Francisco. She has an awesome job. She's responsible for leading the city and county of San Francisco into the digital age with a focus on improving the city's customer service experience. So Carrie, please join me on stage. Thanks so much. I'll go ahead and click forward for you. There you go.
Cool. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Hi. Hey. There we go. As April said, I'm Carrie. I work for the City and County of San Francisco. So welcome for those of you who are out of town. As you can tell, I am too. My job is to focus on improving the user experience of government, which is a bit of a task, as you can imagine. It requires changing culture, business processes, and taking a design-led approach where we put our residents first and understand what their needs are. And as you can imagine, that takes collaboration. It takes new ways of working, trust and openness, which you could call the future of work. And it's not always easy in government to do that. Some of our challenges are huge, as many of you who live and work in this city might know about. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, but it's also really exciting. And so it feels really fitting to be joined on stage by two people from other industries that are also going through huge digital transformation, as government is at the moment. And we're all going to talk about how we're using tools like Slack to collaborate and communicate and share across organizational silos, of which government has many, to become agile innovators. So please welcome onto the stage Jeff Dow, the CIO of 20th Century Fox, and Paul Donnelly, the Vice President for Oracle Corporate Application Services. Hi.
Hi. Morning.
Maybe we'll just kick off by you both telling us a little bit about your organizations, yourselves, and how you're using Slack.
Oh, sure. It's great to be competing with Apple. This is way funner, so thanks, everyone.
Right.
My IT organization has been partnering with a business for a decade on digital transformation. And we've been in business since 1935, and I think our first feature film, Dante's Inferno, with Spencer Tracy, which was shot on 35 millimeter, we have a bunch of that stuff in salt mines in Kansas, and we've got tape repositories in Wyoming. So we've had quite the journey. The theatrical business unit within Fox has fully transformed from 35 millimeter to digital. Our home entertainment and international TV distribution windows has fully transformed to digital distribution. And we've been focused on building out a world-class digital supply chain for years now. And I have a quick, interesting story about the evolution of that supply chain, and it deals with Avatar. Hopefully everybody in here has seen that film, the highest grossing film in history. But back in the mid-90s, the Avatar filmmaker wanted to make that movie, but the technology didn't exist to actually make that movie. And if you flash forward 10 years, the technology did exist. The film was made and released in 2009, around Christmas time. And around Thanksgiving, the movie wasn't quite ready yet, and we had to get it into Russia, which at that time was one of our highest grossing international theatrical markets, and the file was actually 13 terabytes. So we didn't have that much time to actually get it into Russia. The typical process was for a physical drive to go to London, then get shipped into a post house in Russia. We didn't have time, so we proposed to the business unit, hey, let's digitally send it over there over the internet. And they said, you're going to take a $300 million movie and FTP it? We said, no, we're going to chop it up into little UDP packets and send it really fast. And we did that. We sent it into a post house. It was very successful, and that was the genesis of a big moment for our supply chain. And what that evolved into today is we have a technological ballet of Slack and Salesforce and a bunch of other components with partners, and we send our movies, a few of them that are coming up that we hope you see, The Kingsman 2, which opens in 10 days, Murder on the Orient Express, and The Greatest Showman. We actually send those digital files to over 200,000 screens internationally, and it's coordinated with encryption keys that tie the digital file to a theater, to a screen, to a airtime. And that's all tied together with Slack as kind of our operating system behind that digital business. It's actually quite fascinating.
Great. Now how about you, Paul?
So, yeah, Paul Donnelly from Oracle. So I've been working for Oracle now for about 24 years, and I guess Oracle's business has changed quite dramatically in that time. Still a relatively young company, but not as young as Slack. But when we, I guess when we first started distributing software, you know, we were in a business of going out, installing that sort of software on-premise, and things have evolved significantly, as you can imagine. So first sort of level of that was to get to a point where we were delivering, you know, CDs to people and letting them install the software. And that literally compiled of, you know, a quarter end where people would literally be throwing CDs into the back of vans so that they would have the cutoff time so people could cut for all of our P&O. So it was a pretty, you know, ridiculous way to actually distribute software, quite frankly. So then we moved, you know, our contracts into being able to download the software. You know, this has been around actually for quite a while. So we, you know, digital transformation has happened and been happening for a while. So yeah, we're now moving obviously into, you know, running cloud services. So we're not even throwing software out to other people, actually running our cloud software. So, you know, our evolution has been you know, rapid and I think fairly well understood in history.
Great. And so I guess my first question to you, Jeff, is you've given us a flavor there with that anecdote of kind of how digital transformation is taking a hold. But what does it kind of look like at the scale that you're operating at?
Well, scale, you know, we send content into 194 countries across the globe. There's only one that we don't, and I won't mention it. And, you know, we distribute about 1 million files digitally across the world to thousands of broadcasters and movie studios. But I think at Fox, we've actually moved beyond digital transformation, and it's a cultural transformation that we're finding now to keep up with the pace of technology, and Slack has definitely helped us in that journey. I think our challenge is that our consumers want to view content on any device, anywhere, anytime. No longer is it just in a theater or on a TV screen. And so how do we align the creative aspect of our business and the technical aspect of our business to deliver files into 194 countries? How do we take great films like Hidden Figures, Titanic, and Logan, and how do we transcode those into 15 different formats? You know, what you see in a hotel versus on a cruise ship, in your home, Netflix, iTunes, video on demand, streaming video on demand. How do we do that in 68 different languages, right? How do our sister businesses within Fox Sports deliver flawless broadcasts? You know, the Women's World Cup in 2015 and this previous Super Bowl, which was one of the greatest events in human history. You know, there were 78 cameras in that stadium, more than any before. And how do you do that to iPads, iPhones, and tablets with zero latency? You know, how do, you know, our sister businesses in India, Star TV, and Nat Geo deliver amazing content like Einstein directly to the consumer? And again, it's this technological ballet that we've had to keep pace with. You know, we've had to maintain a velocity with our business units with these events, unlike anything that we've ever seen before. And what Slack has enabled us to do, when you mention all of those properties and business units all over the world, we've been able to pull together not only countries, but business units from individuals in different business units. You know, we can have, you know, our Predator mobile app that's developed for the upcoming movie next summer, and they can Slack it out to 25,000 people across the world for feedback. And hey, how can we make this better? How can it kick ass? And it's like, unlike, you know, you can't do that with reply alls, right? So Slack has helped us tremendously.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And for you, Paul, it must be similar because you're operating at that kind of global scale as well, with across multiple countries.
Yeah, well, we're very much a global company. We're about 150,000 people now. We are actually deployed to our product development organization right now. And so over the last 6 weeks, we've literally just deployed to 36,000 people very smoothly and very quickly. And I have to say a big thank you to the success team at Slack. Done an awesome job helping us get through that. Technically, it's not difficult to deploy, of course. Where our challenges have been, how do we arrive at actually kind of deploying Slack? And as part of corporate application services, in my role, I'd like to take all the credit for bringing Slack to Oracle. But of course, it's not really been like that. We've actually been driven a little bit by our acquisitions. So by companies that have used Slack a lot. Dine is a great example, very sophisticated Slack environment. And of course, these companies would be absorbed into Oracle, and we needed somewhere for them to land. We just simply don't have anything existing that would be able to do the job that they do today. Very automated services. So our acquisitions have really driven us to look at Slack really closely. And then the challenge is, is this service really secure or enterprise ready for us to deploy? And with Enterprise Grid, it really gave us the platform that we needed. And that really, not only then could we share between different workspaces within our organization, 36,000 people, you need to still be able to connect to each one of the workspaces. And Enterprise Grid allows you to do that very successfully. The other part of it was, of course, with acquisitions, we're absorbing lots of different tools. And some of those tools are things that we absolutely have to bring in. Some of them are like source code related, and they can be absorbed into existing tools that we have. Obviously, we have a source code service. But something like Slack, of course, we don't. But there's various other tools, and we need to be able to integrate those. So how they were doing business and integrating with all the various other services that they were running, we really don't have the time to go develop all this stuff. And with 1,000 apps just announced, with Slack, that just saves us a whole load of development time. We will still do various integrations with in-house stuff, but our API stack is pretty verbose, and we'll be able to do that very successfully, I'm sure.
And I'm really interested in, coming from a government perspective as well, this is super pertinent for me, but your point, Jeff, about culture change, and then yours, Paul, about the kind of the arrival of new types of company into your kind of corporate body, and that sort of infecting people with these kind of different ways of working. I think definitely. My question is really, what are the biggest culture change barriers or obstacles that you've had to overcome, and how have you done those?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for us, when you look at a digital transformation, right now on the movie lot in Los Angeles, we've got 40 petabytes of content sitting on spinning disks that we're currently sending in S3 and Glacier. It's a tremendous amount of work. When you combine that with the demands from our consumer and for richer experiences, and you look at the journey from 1080 to 2K to 4K to what is now HDR, high dynamic resolution. Our consumers want richer experiences, more contrast, greater color palettes. And to put all of that together and deliver our content, like Deadpool 2 to the consumer, which we're all very excited about, it's a lot of work, and we need very smart people, across, all aspects of what we do. And it's very difficult because as a technology person, you can find a job very easily right now. So I think our greatest culture challenge has been, how do we attract talent who have, different options today to a, company that's been in existence for 82 years. So, how do we turn ourselves into something cool for people to come work at?
To be fair, movies are cooler than government.
Oh, it is cool.
Trying to make government sexy is like one of the hardest jobs.
So, great point. And, so attracting and retaining, I was in the government once.
I'm just saying, right?
Attracting and retaining great talent is culturally, our biggest challenge, because we don't want people thinking they're coming to work in the 1970s. And I have to tell you, with Slack, interestingly enough, as we, interview millennials or people, from any age, and they find out that we have Slack, they're almost shocked or surprised that a company as big as Fox would be forward-thinking with Slack. And believe it or not, that's actually been a recruitment tool for us to attract and retain talent.
Definitely.
I'm sincere about that.
Yeah, it's the same for you, Paul.
Yeah, definitely. I've heard, certainly with companies being absorbed, I mean, any kind of acquisition is pretty troublesome for anybody coming in, having been either taken over or merging. So to be able to take through a technology, that was a real morale boost for a lot of people that came in from various acquisitions. So certainly that was part of it for us.
Yeah, amazing. And I'm wondering as well about collaboration and how, as we've talked about, Slack enables collaboration, but what have been some of the barriers to collaboration that you've had to overcome, and how have these kind of tools supported you to doing that?
Yeah, I think we've all had experience in the world, especially if you're in a global company with different divisions. Collaboration at times was difficult because you had to remember 5 passwords to different systems, and it's difficult sometimes to collaborate with email and such. And I think what has helped us greatly with Slack is then finding other amazing, high energy, Silicon Valley type companies like Zoom and Quip, and to be able to stitch that all together with Okta for single sign-on has really enabled us to position Slack as that operating system of collaboration, across 194 countries and 171 offices. And we're very excited about the launch in different languages. It's just, it's pulled us together. It's pulled 25,000 of us together like nothing else has in the past.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions actually. It's like, what is the modern communication stack for, and collaboration stack for huge global organizations?
For us, we're obviously a cloud company. We have our own services, and Dropbox is out there. A lot of people use that for personal use, but we have our own cloud document service, which we are evangelizing within our own service or internally. We're also using, from a web conferencing and video conferencing perspective, we use Zoom a lot, certainly in the product development space. As another Silicon Valley sort of startup, relatively new company, and certainly up and coming. So we're starting to really use new tools, get those out there for our staff, and they're really excited about it. I've had some really good feedback on both sets of those services as I brought them into Oracle. I mean, one thing I'd also just say around, that from an email perspective, I run the email side at Oracle, and it's it's an interesting space that, we spend literally millions and millions of dollars, protecting ourselves. Oracle being the the security company, people tend to come after us. So when you have an unbreakable slogan down the 101, people tend to sort of take notice of that. So we're constantly batting away various malwares, and we, as I say, we're investing literally millions of dollars to try and deal with that. And with Slack, it's a far more protected solution. If we get more and more of our interactions being used on Slack, I can see it really helping in that space as well.
That kind of leads me to my next question, which is about trust. And I guess from many angles, trust of customers and consumers, but also trust within your organizations. And that, for me, I feel like that's one of the biggest barriers to collaboration is, the different departmental silos trusting each other and feeling confident in each other, and trust that it's okay to have open, transparent communication. Yeah. So how have you dealt with some of those issues?
Well, shall I go?
Sure.
So it's definitely a culture switch. People want to set, the first thing they want to do is set up a private channel. And we go, okay, so why do you want to set this up as a private channel? Public channels have just become, so much more useful to you. We're going to be doing some really innovative things about how we can actually search those channels and deliver more content to you. We won't be able to do that in private channels. So really question, whether private channel is what you need. So but that is a culture shift because people are used to using, closed kind of email distribution list type, communications.
Yeah. And how about for you?
Yeah, I think when we deployed Slack, it was in a big blast to 25,000 people, and it was, it tied together multiple divisions from all over the world. It was kind of quiet until someone posted cat news, right? Kind of opened up the floodgates, and I think rated our Giphy, and then, people just started, piling on and collaborating and communicating and reaching out. And our chairwoman at the studio recently had an event where she had kind of an open town hall Q&A on Slack where anybody from across the world could just send her questions. And it was an amazing event to see how people will open up and communicate. So I think, you know, day by day, week by week, the trust is built there. And you see best friends from different cultures and continents and countries reaching out to each other like never before. And you know, we have a women's group at Fox, you know, that strives for inclusion. And you know, we've had women reach out from all over the world who want to become, you know, part of this group, so it doesn't just, you know, stay a studio event. So Slack has been the hammer that has helped us tear down the walls of silos across 21st Century Fox, definitely.
Someone wrote that down, right? That's a great quote. So just aware of the time, so the final question to end on is, what advice would you give somebody else in your position doing this for the first time?
I guess you need to certainly make sure that your security posture's there, but make your deployment exciting. You know, build up some excitement about what it is you're actually going to be doing, how you're going to be doing it, and get people engaged early. You know, people knew that actually it was quite funny. We had this enterprise, a company-wide summit in which Larry sat at. It was an internal one. It's the first one they'd ever done, and they let slip that Slack was coming. Crikey, my email inbox went absolutely berserk. So yeah, that really did create a buzz around the entire organization. So yeah, create some excitement around it. Quite frankly, it will take care of itself because it's a great tool.
Cool. How about for you?
Yeah, I think this is a great time that we live in as IT or technology professionals, because I think, you know, if you flash back 10 or 15 years, IT was, you know, the gals and guys you might keep in the back office and help desk and firewall rule changes and all of that type of thing. And I think now with the tools that we have at our disposal, we can all, if we align with the business, and that's the key point, you have to align with business. We're actually in a position now, whatever business you're in, to use technology to advance that business. And I think that's the times that we live in, so take advantage of it.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carrie, Jeff, and Paul. It was so great to hear from them, and we're so lucky to have them among our customers. So we have covered a lot of ground this morning. We started from the history of organizational design. We shared our vision for the next frontier of work. We let you know about a couple of big things that are happening for the product here at Slack. And then we've heard from customers, big and small. So we've covered a lot of ground. But in our final keynote of the morning, we're going to expand on these ideas by exploring what makes us tick creatively. The science and experience of innovative thinking with collaborative teams. With us next is Stephen Johnson, and he's a science author, many of you may know. He is a theorist of interdisciplinary, collaborative, and open-minded approaches to innovation. His work on the history of innovation inspired a PBS special called How We Got to Now. Stephen's newest book, which is called Wonderland: How Play Made the Modern World, revolves around the creative power of play. We asked Stephen to join us because many of us are fans of his work here at Slack, and he's been thinking about a lot of the same ideas that we've touched upon today for a really long time. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Stephen Johnson.
All right, I'm delighted to be here. This is really special for me. I have to say, in part because I've spent my life researching and thinking about the history of information and technologies, that it was really inspiring to hear Stewart's remarks this morning. I think it's so important as we start to imagine the new possibilities of these networks and the new kinds of organizational forms that might be possible given the technology around us. It's so important that we take the long view sometimes and think about the kind of long arc of history and the way that these technologies in the past have change society, both as a source for inspiration and also sometimes as lessons in the mistakes that were made in the past. And so what I wanted to do with our time together, and then Stewart and I are going to have a quick chat up here, is build on some of Stewart's ideas and actually look at another invention that I think in some ways that Stewart briefly alluded to, that I think has been maybe the most important in the history of ideas and of collaboration and of creativity, and that invention is the invention of the city itself. So shortly after we first developed stable human settlements that were large enough to be properly called cities about 10,000 years ago, we witnessed almost immediately this explosion in new ideas and new technologies and new forms of organization. So within about 1,000 years of the first cities, we saw the invention of everything from alphabets to standardized currencies to aqueducts to sewers, just really an unprecedented explosion in innovation up until that point in human history. And what's so interesting about this is this has continued to this day. Cities have been and continue to be disproportionately the drivers of new ideas in society. Just think about the city we're in right now, right? San Francisco. San Francisco has been for at least 75 years and arguably longer a major driver of new ideas, not just new technological ideas, which is certainly part of the story of this city, but also new ideas in politics and environmentalism, in lifestyle. New ideas have disproportionately come out of this city and other cities like it. And so the question is, why? What can we learn from this as we're thinking about new organizational forms, as we're thinking about new ways to collaborate and communicate based on the technologies that are now available to us? How can we think about what worked in the history of cities and apply it to those new spaces? That, I think, is a really pressing and interesting and provocative kind of question to ask. Now, one of the key drivers of innovation in the history of cities is really the kind of core property of density. A couple years ago, there's a really fascinating study by Jeffrey West, the scientist at the Santa Fe Institute, who with a bunch of his colleagues tracked the correlation between population size and density and innovation in cities all around the world. And they looked at different measures of innovation and creativity, the number of artists, the number of patents, the amount of R&D spending in a city, the number of startups. And they built this kind of index, a general kind of innovation index, and they looked at how that correlated with population size. And what they found was that there was what they called a superlinear relationship between city size and creativity and innovation, that the bigger the city got, it got disproportionately more creative and more innovative. So a city that was 10 times bigger than another city was actually 17 times more innovative. You know, the average person per capita in a metropolis of 5 million people would be 3 times more innovative than someone living in a kind of mid-metro of about 100,000 people. So something about scaling up and getting bigger, noisier, more crowded, more expensive, all those things that you would think would conflict with creativity, actually unleashed all these new ideas. The bigger you were, the more creative you were. So the question is, what is it about that density that then drives these new ideas, helps them create? And there's a really interesting model that economists have for this. They have a great metaphor for this. They talk about information spillover. And the idea is when you crowd people together, you create this environment where ideas are more likely to just spill from mind to mind. And it's not just kind of market competition, but actually an implicit form of collaboration that crowding people together makes possible. That you have ideas, fragments of ideas, hunches that people casually mention to someone else, and they take that idea and turn it into a new startup or start a new theater troupe or whatever it is. And that flow of information from density makes those sparks of creativity more likely to happen. And the spaces that cities create are often characterized by this kind of beautiful fluidity and casualness, right? Which is an interesting thing, I think, to think about in the context of Slack. I call these spaces liquid networks, building on that kind of fluid idea from information spillover. They're environments where ideas just have a natural capacity to flow from mind to mind in these informal clusters of people. And there are a lot of great examples of liquid networks over the years. My favorite one, which I am obsessed with, if you've read any of my books, it keeps coming up in all of my books, is the 18th century coffee house. The 18th century coffee house, particularly in London, was the seat of the Enlightenment. I mean, this was where the Enlightenment happened. Almost every major innovation in politics, in society, in science, in business, in that period has a coffee house somewhere in its story. Lloyd's of London was famously originally just Lloyd's Coffee House, and the whole modern insurance business came out of Lloyd's of London. Ben Franklin, in the many years that he was living in London during this period, held court at this place called the London Coffee House, which was just an incredible driver of new ideas, both in kind of commercial technology, but also in terms of politics. And I actually went, when I was researching the book that I wrote about this, and I went back to London to try and find if there was a plaque to commemorate this coffee house, because this is our history. This is part of where the modern world was really born. And despite the fact that there's a plaque on like every other building in London, there's no record of this place. But I swear to God, there's a Starbucks exactly where this coffee house was. So they have no idea that they're keeping the torch alive for this historic space, but in a way they are. And the question is, what was it about the coffee house that made it so powerful? Now, part of the story, as some of you know, is the simple fact that they were drinking coffee for the first time, coffee and teas. Up until that point, people just drank alcohol all day long, including in the morning. They would drink beer for breakfast because the water wasn't safe to drink, and they didn't have like orange juice to drink because it was 1600. But in the late 1600s, coffee and tea get introduced, and these new coffee houses appear, and suddenly everybody goes crazy for coffee. And so you have this interesting transformation in the society where everybody basically goes from drinking a depressant all day long to drinking a stimulant all day long. And hey, there's a great flowering of intellectual and industrial activity that happens right immediately after that, no surprise. And there's some interesting scholarship to back that up. But for our purposes, I think what's really important about this space is that it was a multidisciplinary space. It was a space that was not defined by a single profession, by a single business. It was a space where people with different interests could collide and have surprising connections, make links across different fields. And I think that is one of the keys to all of these innovation spaces, particularly urban ones, is that really extraordinary property of diversity. Now, we hear a lot about diversity in the context of kind of multicultural politics and the idea that we want to have diverse organizational forms, we want to have diverse cities, we want to have diverse cabinets, in order to ensure that everyone has a seat at the table, in order to further tolerance in society, and all these are really important ideas. But there's another important value in diversity, which has been backed up by extensive sociology, which is that diverse groups and networks are smarter, are more creative when you are tasked with a complex problem that requires creativity. A group that is more diverse in its makeup, but maybe scores worse on a traditional IQ test, will outperform a more homogeneous group that has higher IQ scores. There's something about bringing people together that have different perspectives on a problem that unlocks new avenues of possibility, new ways of solving those problems in creative ways. There's a really interesting study about 15 years ago by a Stanford business school professor named Martin Roif. And Roif was looking at the social networks of unusually innovative and creative people. And sadly for Roif, this was before the social media age, right before it, and so he had to do a lot of this research by hand. But he went and he interviewed all these folks who had been successful artists or had done startups, who had been innovative inside of large organizations. And he basically built by hand these social network maps, figuring out who they were connected to, who their friends were. And what he found, and then he interviewed a group of less innovative people who he just called up and said, "You seem very dull. Could I interview you for this study?" And what he found was when he compared the two maps, there was a very clear difference between the two groups. And the difference was that the innovators had far more connections to a much more diverse range of professions in their friend network, particularly in their kind of secondary weak tie friend network. So one person might work for an ad agency, but she would be friends with a poet and a popular science writer and a government contract lawyer and a government bureaucrat. Whereas their equivalent on the other side, on the less innovative side, might just know other people in the advertising industry. And you can understand from everything we've said so far that why this might make sense. You have coffee with that friend of yours, you're in advertising, they're an architect. It seems like you're working on different kinds of problems, but there's something in that casual conversation over coffee that sparks an idea, or you think about something in the way that they manage their clients that you can bring over from this other field and in a sense, apply it in a new context, and it unlocks some new door of possibility that you weren't able to see before and that you wouldn't have seen had you not been talking to somebody who had a different vantage point on the world. So it's not just encouraging gender diversity or ethnic diversity, it's also encouraging intellectual, professional, vocational diversity inside your organization as well, right? Trying to unlock all the different points of view and fields of expertise that any medium to large size organization is inevitably going to have. How do you get people out of their silos, as we like to say, and make those connections across disciplines? And it's environments like informal spaces like coffee houses and now virtual spaces like Slack that start to make that possible. And this is actually also a very long story. Stewart alluded to the invention of the printing press. Obviously, one of the most important, probably with the internet, one of the two most important information technology revolutions perhaps ever, certainly in the last millennium. And there's a great story of kind of a chance collision between different professions, a serendipitous connection between different professions in the invention of the printing press. When Gutenberg was working on this new technology that he had, this kind of startup that he had 500 years ago, he thought he'd done all this really cutting-edge work in metallurgy, getting the type to work, and in the inks. There was an important technological problem in getting the inks to dry fast enough so that you wouldn't just have this kind of smear of ink on the page. So he'd done all this work, but he was missing one key thing, which was a pressing mechanism for taking the movable type with the ink and pressing it onto the page. And if you're trying to invent the printing press, it turns out a pressing mechanism is kind of important. And so he was stumped for a while, and he ended up visiting a local winemaker. Just decided to since coffee and tea hadn't come yet, he decided to just drink away his problems. And so he went to this winemaker, and he saw this ancient piece of technology, the screw press, which is literally thousands of years old, been used by vintners to press grapes. And he thought, that's what I'm missing. And so he took the technology designed to press grapes and transformed it into a technology by adding his own innovations, turned it into a technology for printing Bibles. And that changed the world. You went from 20,000 books in circulation to 20 million books in just about 50 years. And it was because he was able to kind of look over the shoulder of someone else working on a different kind of problem from a different perspective. And this pattern of unlikely connections and unpredictable effects actually continues after the printing press. Now, everybody talks about the importance of all that information and how that changed politics and science and religion and led to Protestantism and a million other things. But the other thing that happened with the book is you saw this great surge of literacy in the period after books got into circulation, and that triggered a response in a significant portion of the population, particularly people who were over 40 years old, which is that people started to read, they picked up these books for the first time, and they said, I can't read this. I'm farsighted. And this was actually, interestingly, a problem that was always there in the population. People get farsighted after they're about 40. But no one noticed it, because very few people in the society actually had to look at very small things, only seamstresses and people who worked with very small objects, which is a very small part of the population. And so you had this hidden flaw in the eyes of Europeans that the book, in a sense, exposed. And so that sent out this signal all across Europe that there was a market for another technology, which is spectacles. Suddenly, all across Europe, people started going into the lens-making business because there was now this demand for lenses so people could read these new books. And you saw this explosion in the kind of craftsmanship and technology behind making lenses, spectacles, which almost no one would have ever seen before Gutenberg, suddenly became a common item, one of the most actually advanced pieces of technology people would commonly own in that period. And people started then, because these lenses were in circulation, people started to play with them. They started to mess around with them. And because of that just experimental, open-ended, kind of curiosity-driven play, those lenses led very quickly to the invention of the microscope and the telescope, just about 100 years after Gutenberg. And so think of all the technologies all the breakthroughs in science, our understanding of our place in the universe, all the breakthroughs in medicine that came out of the telescope and the microscope, which was really just an accidental unlocking due to the fact that books were showcasing people's failed vision. So this is what happens when these new paradigms arrive, when you have these new platforms. You see a whole wave of transformations that would be very difficult to predict in advance. And that's probably what we're going through right now. But also what you see in that story with the telescopes and the microscopes is the importance of play, of messing around with new technologies without a really kind of driving force or clear objective. That's what this new book of mine, Wonderland, is all about, is how many important ideas have come out of people messing around just for the fun of it, tinkering with new toys, new technologies. Think about the coffee house, right? The coffee house was a space devoted purely to leisure, to just hanging out, having a good time. In fact, Charles II tried to ban coffee houses shortly after they arrived because it was distracting people from their lawful calling and affairs, as he said. He actually instituted a ban on coffee houses, and that ban lasted 1 week because people were so annoyed that their coffee had been taken away from them. And he was wrong. That playful, open-ended space ended up changing the world. It was incredibly productive, despite the fact that it had no clear purpose. And there's a great example of this in more recent history, part of which takes place here in the Bay Area, which is the story of a game called Space War. Space War was the creation of a bunch of MIT kind of early hackers in the early 60s. And they'd gotten this new kind of mini computer, even though it was the size of a closet. And this new mini computer was really promising because it had a monitor for the first time, a black and white monitor. So they could actually project things on a screen. They had pixels that they could manipulate. And so they were thinking about what are they going to do with all this amazing processing power and with this new capacity of the screen. And so they decided, appropriately enough, to create a game with a kind of a space theme. And you can actually still play this game on its original hardware down at the Computer History Museum down in Silicon Valley. And it's basically kind of like asteroids. You're kind of shooting around. You have two people. You're floating around in space, but there's a sun in the middle. And there's gravity, so you can get pulled into this sun. But it's very addictive. I actually played it with my 15-year-old son who lives in Grand Theft Auto, but he was like, this is kind of fun. And what happened is this game, as frivolous as it seemed, ended up being one of the most influential pieces of software in the 1960s and early 70s, because people started to copy the code and they started to modify it. It's really one of the first open source software projects in history. They started building new technologies. They built a joystick to control the spaceship on the screen, which was one of the first. It's the predecessor, really, of the mouse. It's one of the first times you could control an avatar on the screen that represented you with a piece of hardware. People built physics into it. Somebody built something called Expensive Planetarium, which actually modeled the night sky, the stars, accurately, which is one of the first accurate maps ever to appear on a computer screen, all in the service of this game. And eventually it became so popular that Stewart Brand, who was here in the Bay Area, had done the Whole Earth catalog, he decided to host a kind of convention, the first intergalactic Space War Olympics at the Stanford Computer Center, and he wrote about it for Rolling Stone. And when he saw these people engaging with their computers and saw the sense of play and wonder and delight and fun, it triggered this idea in his head, which was not at all clear to him at the time, which is that computers were not just going to be for the military. Computers were not just going to be about big businesses, and they were not just going to be about government. They were going to be something that was much more intimate and much more creative. And so he wrote this piece for Rolling Stone that starts with, the opening line is, "Computers are coming to the people." The second line was, "That's the best news since psychedelics," because it was 1972, so that's the way that they wrote back then. But inspired by Space War directly, he came up with the phrase personal computer and really triggered a whole new way of thinking about what computation could be used for, all inspired by a game. And of course, that article was then read by another young hippie in the Bay Area who went to work for Atari, inspired by that, which was trying to make Space War into a commercial game, which actually became Asteroids. And that young hippie, as you all probably know, was Steve Jobs. So there is a direct connection from that playful exploration with no clear purpose to the revolution that is shaping our lives and that makes something like Slack and makes something like this conference possible, just as the lack of purpose and open-ended exploration and conversation of the coffee house changed so much 300 years ago. So this is a question that we all have a chance to participate in answering, is what are we going to build on top of these new technologies? And can we build something as powerful and as open-ended and as diverse as the great cities of the world? And I don't know exactly what those networks will look like. I don't know what those new organizational forms will look like, but I'm confident from my own studies of history that they will involve these properties of density and diversity and serendipity. And if we do them right, they will also involve a lot of fun. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Thanks. I'm going to go sit over here.
So I tried that thing that you talked about where you drink coffee instead of beer in the morning, and wow, I am lying. So I'm eager to get started. You mentioned Jeffrey West and some of his work. In the context of cities, I'm really curious. They don't ever seem to die. Corporations die, people die, religions die, countries die, but cities never seem to die.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. And Stewart Brand wrote about this a little bit in his book, How Buildings Learn. Even the street layouts of cities have an incredible durability. You see these pictures. He has a great picture in that book of an aerial sketching of Boston in kind of 1650, and then an aerial overview today. And like the streets are every single building has changed, but the streets are exactly the same arrangement. But the other thing I was thinking about in terms of cities and networks and technology, if we'd been having this conversation 20 years ago, say, or 23 years, right at the beginning of kind of the web, there would have been a lot of people who would be up here saying, you know what's going to happen is we're going to have these distributed network technologies, and cities are just going to dissipate. No one's going to need to crowd into dense urban areas because we've got the internet, we've got the ability to communicate. So everybody's going to live on their ranch in Montana and telecommute and all that kind of stuff. And of all the predictions made in that period, that was, I think, the most wrong. I mean, the exact opposite happened, right? Everywhere where the internet technologies and business has really taken off, the cities are so popular now that no one can afford to live there anymore, as in this one. And so we've seen a great intensification of urban spaces, contrary to what the pundits would have predicted back then.
Yeah, it's funny. Things like pets.com were just too early, but that one probably is never going to come true. When I was backstage, well, first of all, I brought my phone up because I kind of stupidly tweeted, hey, if anyone has any questions for Stephen, you can tweet them. And then I saw right before I came up that people actually had questions. But before I get to them, one thing struck me when I was backstage, when you're talking about liquid networks, we frequently struggle to describe the benefit of Slack. If you come to our offices, we have these giant monitors that just scroll tweets, and the tweets say things like, I can't imagine going back and working without Slack. I'm not just tooting our own horn here. It changes the way we work and stuff like that, but it's usually like really vague and general. It changed the way we work, and sometimes we have trouble articulating what it is. But that idea of a liquid network and talking about the coffee houses, I think there's an element of that in the way that employees now get to work together, the visibility for ideas across the organization, that kind of transparency, and having like one place where work happens.
Yeah, I've seen it a lot as I travel around and talk to organizations. You can see it happening in the physical layout of offices as well as in the kind of virtual layout of a network like Slack, which is you see more and more people getting rid of conference rooms, and that the idea of kind of like having a meeting with 10 people in a conference room while somebody like throws up a PowerPoint and everybody sits there for an hour, that people are going to realize like that is where ideas go to die, right? That kind of experience. And they're taking out the conference rooms and creating spaces that are more kind of coffee house-like in the way that they look, and they often include coffee and beer every now and then. But it's creating that space where multiple meetings are going on, and where you have that kind of multi-threaded environment where you're likely to kind of stumble across somebody who's working on a similar problem who you hadn't invited to the meeting. Those kind of spaces, I think, are really, they have that kind of casual fluidity that really leads to a more creative and also more fun work environment.
Speaking of work environments, this is a real question from Twitter. How do companies better create the conditions for innovation inside their walls? And I think that's something that a lot of people ask, and probably a lot of people in the audience are working at places that want to drive more innovation. Any recommendations?
Well, you know, one of the things I think that one of the mistakes that I think companies make is they look at, you know, the kind of Bay Area culture and they're like, okay, those companies are incredibly innovative, and the tech sector in general, and they say, what do they have? You know, they've got their foosball tables, you know, and so they kind of like, all right, if we can just bring a foosball table in, everybody will be creative, and this is just the worst thing to do, right? Because it's not about the foosball table, it's about a broader culture, and I think it's finding kind of genuine passions that people have that are related to their work and to their responsibilities, but that are also kind of like hobbies, right? I mean, you look at all these people that I've written about, one of the key characteristics they have is they just have a lot of hobbies. Mm-hmm. So creating a workspace where your hobbies are kind of, you know, free to be a part of the space, and where that's encouraged because they're going to be the source of new ideas and because it'll make work even a little bit more fun. I was at the Etsy offices in Brooklyn, and one of the things that they have instead of a foosball table is they have musical instruments everywhere. I guess if you work at Etsy in Brooklyn, there's like a 90% chance you have like an indie band as well, you know. And so there's like pianos and guitars, and people will like work really hard, and then they'll sit there and like play some music for 15 minutes, and then they'll go back to work. And that seems like a genuine kind of way to diversify the experience without it just seeming cheesy.
Yeah, okay, that's a good one. What do we do to help kids continue to play and not just be focused on outcomes and marks in school?
Yeah, I'm thinking about this a lot with this new project and something else I'm working on. You know what I did with my own son a year ago over the summer? I wrote a little piece about this on Medium if people are interested. We spent the summer designing a board game together, and it was just an incredibly rich, fun experience. And when you think about what you do when you are designing a game, not just playing a game, but designing it, is you're building a complicated system with different components. You're thinking about the metaphor of the game, what's it going to be about. You're thinking about chance and probability. You're thinking about strategy and how people are going to play it. And you build this mental model in your head of what the game should be. And then you play you kind of mock it up with cardboard, and then you play the first game, and it's terrible. Like, it's really boring, or somebody always wins, whoever goes first always wins, or everybody gets stuck in one corner of the board, or whatever it is. And so then you have to revise. You built this hypothesis about how this complex system is going to work, and then you have to revise it and start again and tinker with it and iterate and try it again. And so, you know, the 9-year-old just is having a blast, doesn't realize what he or she is doing, but actually what they're doing is learning the scientific method, really, and kind of product iteration. And so I think thinking about game design as something that is a core part of a school curriculum, I think is something, but also something to think about as parents as well.
Yeah, we're a group of people who are famously bad at designing games ourselves.
Well, yeah, I mean, your history is a great example of this. I mean, I think about that a lot. You keep failing to build a game, but then building something really cool. Someday.
Yeah. I remember actually, man, this is a long time ago, 15 or 16 years ago, walking over to give a talk on creativity and constraints. And while I was on the way over, this is in the Upper West Side, there was a school that let out, and all the kids just like flew out into the schoolyard and immediately started playing. And a lot of them were formal games like Foursquare and things like that. And a lot of them were just totally informal games, like down to the level of, I'm going to run as fast as I can and you run after me. That does seem to be something that drains out of people as we get older.
I mean, basically, kids, if left to their own devices, kids will spend as much time inventing games as they will actually playing them, that the process of inventing the game is really just a part of the appeal. And then they start, getting old enough for Little League, and it's like, these are the rules of baseball that have been laid down, and they get told how to play the game, and I think they do lose that. So keeping that idea of kind of continual playful invention alive it's also just a really fun thing to do.
All right, we got a minute and a half before I'm going to call April back up. So some lightning round questions.
Okay.
AR and VR as a new coffee house, possible?
I think the interesting thing, I've been thinking about a game that I would love to build one of these days. You know, what was so interesting about the Pokemon Go thing was that you suddenly had people kind of gathering in public spaces and making connections with kind of strangers, fueled by this quest for these imaginary creatures. And I think that it's funny, if AR really does become a dominant technology, it's fitting that we'll look back and say, well, the first thing that really happened along those lines was a game, which would not be you know, a break from the past. That's the way it often happens. What people are doing for fun turns out to become serious stuff down the line. But I hope that we'll see more experiments where it doesn't just become a kind of, in a sense, AR and VR are in the opposite poles. VR is just like you're in a bubble and you're only dealing with people virtually. AR actually creates a space where you can share, you know, there's a kind of shared hallucination that you can be a part of in real life, which I think is maybe more exciting to me.
All right, robots and AI taking people's jobs. Optimistic, pessimistic?
It's one of the great questions. Two points I would make. The first is there is a really interesting third position that has started to appear. For a long time, the debate was, they're going to take our jobs and it's terrible, or everybody's always said that, but we end up inventing new jobs and there are going to be plenty of jobs. The third position that has emerged in the last couple of years is maybe they will take our jobs, and maybe that's okay. That maybe the kind of 9-to-5 industrial model that we've had for 300 years is just this interesting little parenthesis. And we might have an opportunity now to invent a different way of living and to find meaning in other forms of things other than going into your job and doing your 9-to-5 labor that might be possible thanks to robotics. And the only other thing I would say, that I'm writing about this in this new book that I'm doing on long-term decision making, and this is true of climate change as well, the idea that we are having a conversation now about like rogue AI and superintelligence. So we're sitting here and thinking about a problem that likely won't come for another 50 years. It has really no precedent in our history. Is really remarkable. This is something that human beings have not done before. They've not been able to project forward in 50 years or 100 years and say, hey, we believe, based on previous trends, that there may be a big problem that we'll have to deal with in 50 years or 70 years, so let's think about it now and plan accordingly. That is a form of foresight that we're not necessarily very good at it yet, but the fact that we're even trying is really remarkable. And the same thing with climate change. That it's obviously really frustrating that people are still resistant to the idea that this is an important thing, but the idea that we're trying to convince people to make changes now based on, you know, what we project to be disasters, or even more disasters 50 years from now, that's a hard trick. Human beings are capable of foresight more than any other creature on the planet, but not 50-year scale or the 100-year scale. So we have to learn how to think that way. And the fact that we're trying to do it, I think, at least is encouraging to me.
Me too. Stephen Johnson, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for being here. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Really enjoyed it.